Pick the worst Tuesday you can remember. The one where you got dumped, or got fired, or got the call you'd been dreading, and you spent the rest of it slumped by a rain-streaked window, watching a gray afternoon that couldn't be bothered to care. Or pick the opposite, a summer night, packed shoulder to sweating shoulder with 40,000 strangers, the air thick and warm and humming. Whichever one you picked, I'd bet the room wasn't silent. There was a melody somewhere, a chorus bleeding out of a passing car. One chord struck on a guitar before anyone had even started to sing. Now look at the air right in front of your face. Go on. There's nothing there. That's the point. It's a clear, dull soup of stuff. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, not quite a percent of argon, and a faint confetti of dust and pollen and whatever else is drifting through the room. It has no opinions. It feels nothing. It is the single most boring thing in your house, a pile of ordinary molecules bouncing off each other at random, going nowhere, meaning nothing. And yet, the instant that dull gas starts squeezing itself into neat little ripples of pressure, packing tighter, loosening, packing tighter, somewhere between a few dozen and a few thousand times a second, it can walk straight past the one part of you are proudest of. Your reason. The part you'd swear is yours, locked, sovereign, nobody's business but your own. You think your prefrontal cortex is a fortress. Free will. Your call. The door bolted from the inside. Here's the thing nobody tells you. That fortress has a cheap little bug in it. No villain in a trench coat. No chip implanted behind your ear while you slept. Just air. Follow one ripple in. The molecules relay their shove like a line of billiard balls. The last one taps a stretched scrap of skin, not quite a centimeter wide, deep in your ear. And the distance that tap moves your eardrum is about 1/10 the width of a single hydrogen atom. Sit with how absurd that is. A nudge smaller than an atom. A disturbance so faint it barely qualifies as physical at all. It's enough. Before your rational mind has even registered that something happened, before the alarm bell upstairs has finished its first ring, that little wave has already kicked in the door of your limbic system and is standing in the room where your feelings live, the amygdala with its boots on the furniture. And your hearing is quicker than your sight. That is the whole reason the 100-meter sprint starts with a gunshot and not a flash of light. Because even Usain Bolt, the fastest nervous system on the planet, processes a flash of light a few hundredths of a second slower than he processes a bang. Over the length of his own eyelash, light loses the race to sound. This is a hostile takeover, and it is over before you knew it began. You cannot, by sheer willpower, reach into your own chest and change your heart rate. Try it. Sit there and command your endocrine system to behave. Nothing. But this disembodied wobble of air pressure can. It can drag your heartbeat into step with its tempo. It can order your tear ducts to start filling right now in a quiet room for no reason you could defend in court. And this is the truly outrageous part. It can con its way into the locked vault at the center of your brain, the nucleus accumbens, the bit that normally only fires for fried chicken and cocaine, and talk it into spilling dopamine. For air. For free. We have a flattering name for being mugged like this. We call it music, art, refined taste. We put on our good clothes and file into a gilded concert hall to watch several dozen people in immaculate tailcoats solemnly drag horsehair across rosined wood, or thump a stretched sheet of dehydrated dead sheep with sticks. And then we dab at the corners of our eyes, certain we are having a moment of high spiritual elevation. We are not. To a cold neurobiologist, none of this is ethereal at all. It is a high IQ joint heist pulled by physics and biology working together. Mozart, Beethoven, the platinum hitmakers in the pop factory. Strip away the mystique, and they are superb acoustic engineers, working out a precise formula of coercion that walks around your free will and issues commands directly to your glands. The question that should keep you up is this: why does one set of air vibrations get to wield that kind of tyranny over you? And why on earth did nature, that stingy, penny-pinching accountant who writes off anything useless without a flicker of mercy, let our species keep a loophole this dangerous, a back door that can make a grown adult lose their mind in a stadium? To find the bottom of that bad debt on evolution's ledger, we are going to do something humbling. We're going to give up the grand human view from the top, the genius, the soul, the goosebumps, and shrink down to ride one of those molecules of air, compressed 440 times a second, the wrong way up a narrow, dark, wet tunnel of flesh, and then all the way out across 40,000 years. And before it even reaches your eardrum, we have to make our first stop 2,500 years ago in a blacksmith shop in ancient Greece, where a bad-tempered mathematician is about to announce a law that will rule music for 2 millennia and prove it by committing the first famous academic fraud in the history of science. One quiet aside before we climb in. If a slow trip down a tunnel of flesh, narrated by someone who clearly thinks about the inside of your ear far too much, is your idea of a good night, the subscribe button conjures the next one. The cranky mathematician at the anvil is more interesting than I am anyway, so let's go watch him lie to history. Roughly 500 years before the Common Era, in the Greek colony of Croton, the story goes that Pythagoras was walking past a blacksmith shop when he noticed something lovely. As hammers of different weights came down on the anvil, they rang out notes that fit together agreeably, like a held chord. A charming little fable of scientific awakening. There is only one problem with it. As physics, it is total nonsense. The pitch an anvil sings has nothing whatsoever to do with how heavy the hammer is. Pythagoras either fudged the experiment or never did it that way at all. Call it what it is. A man who found a real truth and then dressed it up in a flattering origin story he knew was false. The first cooked lab notebook in recorded history. But wherever he actually ran the numbers, and it was almost certainly on plucked strings, not anvils, what he discovered was real, and it would govern Western music for the next 2,000 years. Beautiful sound, he found, is built on the simplest possible whole number ratios. Here, do it with me. Take a string, pluck it. It gives a note. Now, lay your finger exactly halfway along it, so only half the string is free to shake. Pluck again. The new note sounds almost like the first one. Same flavor, just lifted, brighter. That half-length string is vibrating at precisely twice the speed of the first. 2 to 1. In music, we call that jump the octave. Slide your finger so 2/3 of the string is shaking instead, and the ratio becomes 3 to 2. And that's the perfect fifth, the most consoling interval in the language. Pythagoras walked this ladder of simple fractions all the way up. And here's where it gets strange, because the string was keeping a secret from your eyes. When you pluck a guitar string, you see one line, swinging up and down as a single hole. But down at the scale physics actually cares about, that string is running a frantic bit of multitasking. It is not only vibrating as a whole, at the very same instant, its two halves are each shaking on their own, and its thirds, and its quarters, and its fifths, all stacked on top of each other at once. Physicists call these passengers the overtones, which means every natural note you have ever heard arrives with a chord already folded inside it. You thought you heard one pitch. What you actually heard was a hidden choir, the main note down at the bottom, and above it a stack of fainter, higher voices climbing in tidy whole number steps. And the simpler the ratio between two notes, the more their hidden choirs line up and overlap, and the more your ear sighs and calls it harmony. So far, so tidy. A universe that does arithmetic and sounds lovely doing it. But now, walk into a concert hall and physics hits a wall. There were 80 musicians on that stage, all sawing and blasting and thumping at once. The scrape of a violin bow, the brass blare of a trumpet, the leather shudder of a kettle drum. Every one of them is spraying its own elaborate choir of overtones into the air. And our molecule, remember our molecule hanging there in the middle of the hall, has no brain, no plan, and exactly one move available to it. It cannot split in two. It cannot sprout 80 little hands to carry 80 instruments separately. All it can physically do is shove itself back and forth on the spot. So when the violin's wave says, go 10 nanometers forward, and the trumpet's wave says, no, 5 nanometers back, the molecule doesn't panic, and it doesn't pick a favorite. It just does the honest, obedient sum, and ends up moving 5 nanometers forward. Every overtone of every instrument in the room gets squeezed and piled on top of each other in the air and kneaded into one single ragged wave, jagged and burred like the teeth of a saw. And that one wave, the whole orchestra mashed into a single line, is what slams into your eardrum. Which raises a genuinely hard question. If 80 instruments arrive at your ear pre-mashed into one wave, how does your brain pull them back apart into violin and trumpet and drum? The man who cracked that lived in Paris in 1822, a mathematician named Jean-Baptiste Joseph Fourier. And the wonderful thing is, he wasn't thinking about music at all. He was trying to work out how heat spreads through a sheet of metal, and almost as a side effect, he invented one of the most powerful tools in the universe, the Fourier transform. There's a cruel little irony in him. This is a man who used the most elegant mathematics ever written to tame heat, and then, in old age, fell into a genuine obsession with heat itself. Convinced that high temperatures cured everything, he wrapped himself like a mummy in stifling, overheated rooms, even in summer, and died of heart disease. But the tool he left behind rescued every physicist ever tormented by a complicated wave. What Fourier proved is this. Any wave, however rough and lumpy and bizarre, as long as it repeats, can be taken apart cleanly into a stack of smooth, simple water ripple waves. The Fourier transform is, at heart, a machine for unmixing. Picture a pot of pork rib soup that's been simmering for 4 hours. Cloudy, rich, a dozen spices melted into one another, impossible to tell apart. Now, drop that soup into Fourier's mathematical meat grinder, and it comes out the far side in an instant in its pure original parts. 15 grams of salt, 300 grams of clear water, a little heap of star anise, one raw chunk of pork. That is exactly, precisely, what your hearing does to a wall of sound. But don't hand the credit to the vague blob you call your brain. The brain hasn't even been told yet. This unmixing happens earlier and more brutally than that. Deep in the snail shell coil of your inner ear, there's a thin strip of membrane that gets steadily wider along its length, the basilar membrane, like the strings of a tiny grand piano rolled up tight. Because it's narrow and stiff at one end and wide and slack at the other, when that jagged, mashed-up wave comes charging through, different spots along the strip shudder to different pitches. The high notes light up the stiff end, the low notes the slack end. And here is the part that should genuinely astonish you. Before a single nerve has fired, before any message has gone to your brain, the Fourier transform has already been performed, physically, mechanically, by a wet ribbon of tissue, peeling the orchestra back apart into its separate pitches by sheer resonance. And different materials shape their overtones differently. Wood swallows the high frequencies, brass throws them back, and that difference is what we call timbre. It is why, eyes shut, in a roaring crowd, you can pick out the exact sound of your own mother shouting your full name across the noise. At this point, you'd think we'd nailed it. Pythagoras gave us the ratios. Fourier gave us the math. The inner ear does the sorting. Music is just physics. Settled, cosmic, true. The European classical world believed exactly that for centuries. Our piano keyboard, the 12 even steps of it, was supposed to be carved straight out of the laws of the universe. And then, in the 19th century, European missionaries and traders carried that smug certainty onto the island of Java in Indonesia and heard gamelan. Banks of bronze gongs and metal bars and drums, dozens of them, ringing together. And to ears raised on Bach and Mozart, it sounded like someone had knocked over the entire pots and pans cupboard down a flight of stairs. The scale didn't fit their black and white keys anywhere. Everything seemed sour, out of tune, scraping. The missionaries wrote home complaining that this was lawless noise, no rules, no system. And the locals, of course, were utterly transported by it, the most beautiful sound they knew. So had physics failed on Java? No. The overtone series is real. Nature really does do its arithmetic. But harmony, the human verdict on which combinations are beautiful and which are ugly, that turns out not to be a law of the universe at all. It is a long, slow, ruthless cultural conquest. Pythagoras handed humanity a box of paints. Which painting you call beautiful is decided by the habits you soaked up before you were old enough to know it was happening. Go study Indian classical music. They don't chop the octave into our 12 steps. They slice it into 22 finer ones, shrutis, and some of the gaps between them are so small, a Western musician genuinely cannot hear that anything changed. Or take the blues, born in the American South, whose whole irresistible ache lives in the blue note, where the singer bends the pitch deliberately into the crack between two piano keys. In cold acoustic terms, that's an unstable frictional smear of frequency. To a brain raised on it, that smear is the most seductive sound in the world. The paints are nature's. The picture is ours. And we have only sorted out pitch and timbre, the colors. If you can't lay these colors out along a precise timeline, millisecond by millisecond, you've still got nothing but noise. So next, we have to watch how time climbs into the hijacking. And it climbs in through your foot. Some dull afternoon. You're in a chain cafe, staring at a spreadsheet that has personally wronged you, half dead behind the eyes. Out of the speaker in the ceiling, some old rock track from the 80s is playing, and you're not even listening to it. And then, at a second you could not name if your life depended on it, the heel of your right foot starts tapping the floor, dead in time with the kick drum, completely without your permission. You didn't decide to do that. Your leg seems to have grown a small soul of its own and gone freelance. To the colleague across from you, it's mildly annoying. To a neuroscientist, it is an act of outright hacking and a small miracle. Here's why it matters. Your heartbeat, the churn of your gut, those are an animal's private internal rhythms. They're sealed in. Throw a fully wound mechanical clock into a black, locked room, and its gears keep meshing and ticking with perfect precision, blind and deaf, caring nothing about the world outside. It just runs its program in the dark. But keeping time with music is a completely different kind of trick, and it can't be done blind. Because when you nod or tap along to that rock song, your brain is not reacting to the beat it just heard. It can't be. If you waited for each drum hit to actually reach your ears before telling your foot to move, and your nerves take about 0.2 of a second to carry that order down, every single tap would land hopelessly behind the beat, like a bad echo. To land on the beat, your brain has to do something genuinely spooky. It has to predict the future. So the moment the music starts, your auditory cortex begins computing at speed. It grabs a few faint accents in a row, measures the gaps between them down to the millisecond, and ships that timing forward to the basal ganglia and the supplementary motor area, the deep machinery that runs rhythm and deliberate movement. The basal ganglia are obsessed, almost pathologically, with an outside beat. And here's the most stunning evidence in the whole field. Take a patient with severe Parkinson's whose basal ganglia are so damaged they sometimes can't take a single step on their own, and play them a march with a hard, strong beat. The external sound waves walk straight around the broken internal pacemaker, seize the motor nerves directly, and the patient walks smoothly, in time. The music drives the body the broken brain couldn't. This whole intricate relay, predict the next hit, fire the muscle a hair before it lands, is finished a fraction of a second before the real drum even sounds. Neuroscience has a name for it: entrainment. The vibrating air is a foreign gear jammed bodily into the spinning clockwork of your brain, dragging hundreds of millions of neurons into lockstep with its tempo. Your foot was conscripted. You weren't asked. And for the longest time, we told ourselves this was the line, the thing that made us special, alone in all of nature. You can train a clever border collie for months, and you will never get it to wag its tail in time to a waltz. Hand a chimpanzee, our closest relative, a maraca, and play it a simple pop song, and all you get is enthusiastic, formless rattling. Most mammals just don't have the broad, fast bridge between the hearing parts and the moving parts of the brain that this trick needs. And then, in 2007, that comforting human boundary got stamped flat by a bird listening to the Backstreet Boys. A grainy, pixelated video was going round the internet of a sulfur-crested cockatoo named Snowball, who, the second a pop song came on, didn't just bob his head, he planted his clawed foot on every downbeat, dead on, not missing. The researcher Anirudh Patel, half disbelieving, brought Snowball into the lab and started secretly speeding the songs up and slowing them down behind the scenes. And that's what dropped the room into silence. Because Snowball didn't just have the beat memorized. He felt the tempo change and adjusted, relocking his head bobs onto the new speed in real time. A parrot was doing the thing we'd reserved for ourselves. Why a parrot, of all things? Patel's team chased the thread and offered a neat hypothesis. maybe keeping a beat is a side effect of being a vocal learner, an animal that learns its sounds by imitating the world. To copy sounds, evolution has to lay down thick cabling between the hearing and the moving parts of the brain. And music's beat just sneaks in and hijacks that same cabling. Parrots are vocal learners.
It fit.
It fit beautifully for a few years, until 2013, when a California sea lion named Ronan dragged the whole tidy idea into the water and roughed it up. Sea lions are not vocal learners. They cannot imitate human speech, full stop. No cabling for it. And yet, in the lab of Peter Cook and Colleen Reichmuth, Ronan bobbed her head in flawless, committed time to the funk of Earth, Wind, and Fire. Which means the back door the beat leaves open in the brain is older and more widespread and stranger than anyone had guessed. Not a perk of being a talker at all. By now, our molecule of air has armed itself to the teeth. Loaded with mathematics and a relentless beat, it comes barreling at the side of your skull at 340 meters a second. And what it's about to crash into is a cramped little tunnel of flesh that runs absurdly like a worn-out industrial water pump. That wave hits the opening in the side of your skull and meets its first obstacle, a thin, half-see-through scrap of dead skin, stretched tight, the eardrum. The wave pushes it in, and when the room is truly silent and you catch the faintest rustle, the dimple it presses into your eardrum is again about 1/10 of the width of one hydrogen atom. Nature is showing off here, and it should make you a little dizzy. A flap of tissue made of plain carbohydrate, sensitive enough to register a poke smaller than an atom. But that exquisite sensitivity comes with an immediate, nasty problem. Because if you let that feeble air wobble wrap directly on the hearing nerve, you would hear absolutely nothing. The nerve sits soaking in fluid, deep in the inner ear. And here's the trouble with that. Dive under the surface of a pool and have a friend stand on the edge and scream at you with everything they've got. And all you get is a muffled, distant droning. That's not your ears failing. That's physics. The jump in density between air and water is enormous, and sound hates that jump. When a sound wave traveling through air hits water, about 99.9% of its energy bounces straight back off the surface, as if it slammed into a rubber wall, and less than 1/10% squeezes through into the water. The inside of your skull faces that exact swimming pool problem every waking second, a faint wave in air trying to shove open a heavy door of fluid. So evolution built a workshop in the gap to fix it, and the workshop is a smithy. The machinery doing the job is the 3 smallest bones in your body, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And the anatomists who named them just reached for an old blacksmith's toolkit, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. Which is perfect, because there is nothing sleek or electronic about how they work. It's a genuine forge. When the eardrum trembles its 1/10 of an atom tremble, it sets the hammer swinging. The hammer grips the anvil. The anvil drives the stirrup. Now, the eardrum catching the sound is about 55 square millimeters across. The little footplate of the stirrup, the part that finally shoves the inner ear door open, is just 3.2. And physics is firm about this. Squeeze the same push down from a big area onto a tiny one, and the pressure leaps up. Add the leverage built into the 3 bones, and this little biological jack multiplies the air's pathetic shove by about 22 times, enough at last to crack open the water gate. And strapped onto this violent little lever system, almost as an afterthought, are the two smallest muscles in your whole body, the stapedius and the tensor tympani. When you open your mouth to talk, or bite down on something, or a sudden roar goes off nearby, these tiny muscles clench within a few thousandths of a second and lock the stirrup, jamming the whole lever to a stop. They're a reflex brake, and you want them badly, because without that brake, the sound of you chewing a single dry cracker would arrive inside your skull like a man running a power drill against the bone. Nature put shock absorbers on the smithy. Now, the stirrup is hammering hundreds of times a second against the fluid sealed inside the inner ear. Air's job is done. The whole stage hands over to fluid. Every kick of the stirrup whips up a tiny tsunami inside an organ no bigger than a pea, coiled exactly like a snail shell, the cochlea. Down the length of it runs that basilar membrane we met before, stiff and narrow at the front for the high notes, wide and slack deeper in for the low ones. The waves of fluid roll along it until they find the spot tuned to their pitch and set it shuddering. And growing up out of that membrane, all along its length, are 15,000 hair cells. And I mean this almost literally, a tiny V-shaped kelp forest swaying in a black ocean inside your head. Out of the top of each cell pokes a little cluster of fine filaments, the stereocilia, and when the stirrup whips up the waves, the whole forest thrashes in the current. And right here, nature tears up its own rulebook. Each of those filaments has at its tip a microscopic gate, an ion channel, and the gates are tied to each other by little protein springs called tip links. Now, in 99% of the cells in your body, potassium ions sit politely inside, and sodium ions stay outside, and the books are balanced. But inside this freak organ, the fluid washing over the tops of the hair cells has been deliberately flooded with potassium, charging it to a startling positive voltage, about plus 80 millivolts, while the inside of the cell stays negative. Nature has wired itself a battery running at a full 120 millivolts of difference and parked it in your head. So when a wave of fluid shoves the filament sideways, the protein spring is physically stretched tight and it yanks the little gate open, exactly like hauling up a cellar door by a rope. And the instant that door opens, there's no slow, fussy chemistry, no energy spent ferrying anything. The positive potassium is simply sucked through by that waiting voltage. A spark. The cell spits out a neurotransmitter. Because the whole thing skips the slow chemical handshake and runs on a raw mechanical tug plus a flood of voltage, the conversion, air's motion becoming the body's electricity, takes only a few millionths of a second. That is why, in a dark forest at night, you can pin down the exact spot where a twig just snapped before you've even turned your head. But this design, in its hunger for pure speed, carries a flaw soaked in black comedy. If you deafen a pigeon, or a frog, or even a humble zebrafish with a blast of noise, then over the next few weeks, its inner ear will quietly, methodically grow a fresh batch of perfect new hair cells. Nature handed that gift freely to the goldfish in the bowl and the birds in the trees. And then, in mammals, in us alone, it slammed that regeneration switch shut and welded it closed. Which means the kelp forest inside your ear is a single-use item. You get one. So when you wedge your earbuds in, crank the volume to the top, and pour skull-rattling metal straight down the canal, what you are actually doing is whipping up a Category 12 hurricane inside your own cochlea. The violent fluid batters the hair cells, stretches the protein springs past their limit, sometimes snaps them clean. Worse waves tear the filaments off at the root, and they lie flattened across the membrane like a forest after a gale, slowly withering. And that long, high ringing in your ears for hours after a loud concert? That is not the hair cells crying out as they die. It's stranger and sadder than that. It's your auditory cortex, suddenly starved of its input, falling into a panic and firing off on its own. The brain, alone in the dark, calling out for the dead cells that aren't answering. A phantom pain of hearing. The forest is gone, and the brain keeps shouting its name. At this point, our little machine has finished its tragic, heroic shift. The air's energy is wrung dry. The levers go still. The fluid settles. And out of the inner ear, along the hearing nerve, tens of thousands of electrical pulses are now racing toward the brainstem at nearly 40 meters a second. There is no feeling in them. They are tiny, cold, identical sparks, meaningless code. And on the road ahead, your brain, sealed in a pitch-black box of bone, using nothing but a few grams of greasy chemicals, has to brute force that nonsense into joy, or into the sudden need to weep. Which is, frankly, the part that should keep a person awake. Because nothing about those sparks is musical. So how does a mob of leaping ions become Mozart? To find out, you run into a stubbornly physical wall. You cannot crack open a living person's skull to watch the cortex work while they listen. The only window a neuroscientist has is the fMRI scanner. So in 2008, Charles Limb at Johns Hopkins set out to answer a wonderful question. With one, when a jazz musician launches into the kind of wild, free improvisation that follows no written rule at all, what is the brain actually doing? And Limb immediately smacked into an absurd practical problem. An fMRI is, at its core, a superconducting electromagnet weighing several tons. Put an electric guitar or even a handful of metal keys into that room, and the magnet would catch them in a heartbeat and fire them through the wall like armor-piercing shells. On top of which, the machine at full power roars at 110 decibels, about the racket of a runaway pile driver. Limb's fix was gloriously stubborn. He had an engineer build a 35-key piano made entirely of plastic. Its key presses carried out by fiber optic light, not a scrap of metal in it. Then he gathered jazz pianists, the sort used to swaying in dim, smoky bars, crammed them into a tube 60 centimeters wide, clamped their heads in foam so they couldn't tilt a millimeter, and said, over the intercom, essentially, "Now be creative," in the belly of a pile driver. And as they laboriously picked out improvised lines on the plastic keys, Lim watched the shadows of blood move across his screen. Working neurons burn oxygen, so wherever oxygen-rich blood floods in, you know those neurons are firing hard. And what Lim saw overturned an assumption that had stood for a very long time. We'd always pictured the listening brain as a sponge, passive, just soaking up the incoming sound. The images showed the opposite. The brain isn't mostly receiving. It's furiously outputting. There's a name for this: predictive coding. And to get your head around that slightly dry phrase, you have to meet a basic factory setting of the human mind. Your brain is a paranoid, anxious, deeply insecure fortune teller. Out in the Pleistocene wilderness, the thing that got you killed wasn't always a roaring beast. Sometimes it was a small wrongness, a rustle in the bushes that didn't match the wind, a thing that looked like a rock until its surface flushed, suddenly, with the cold sheen of scales. The price of failing to predict that was, very often, a fatal bite. So the brain evolved a kind of obsessive compulsion. It refuses to simply live in the present moment. It is, every millisecond, guessing what comes next. You can feel it run. Hear a melody you know, say "Happy Birthday" to, and in the instant "to" lands, your auditory cortex has already computed the next word, "you," and laid it neatly down at the finish line, waiting. If the singer suddenly stops dead right there, or swaps you for a blaring car horn, your cortex throws an alarm, the prediction collapses, and your whole nervous system does that little physical lurch, the exact feeling of your foot missing a step on a dark staircase. So Beethoven, Mozart, and the star producers in the pop factory are every one of them doing the same job, high-level hacking of your prediction engine. Feed it music that confirms every single guess, a plodding nursery tune, two tigers, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and you're bored stiff. Feed it music with no pattern at all, that shatters every guess, someone kicking an accordion down 4 flights of stairs, and you call it noise. The most exquisite pleasure music can give you lives on the knife's edge between the two. Build the expectation up, then violate it by just the right amount, then resolve it home. Watch the cycle turn. A strange chord lands where you didn't expect it. Your brain misses the step. The prediction error alarm flashes wild across the gray matter, and a crowd of neurons get scrambled into emergency duty over this tiny crisis. And then, a few bars later, that odd chord, after a clever little chain of moves, slides safely home to the note you'd been quietly craving the whole time. Alarm canceled. And now, your brain has had it both ways. The intellectual thrill of the suspense and the warm flood of relief when a crisis is safely diffused. And as the top prize for sticking the landing, it drips a little dopamine into the nucleus accumbens, the seat of reward. So the ugly truth is this. Our addiction to music is really an addiction to being safely toyed with. We pay for the thrill of being threatened by something we know in our bones cannot actually hurt us. And this same airtight logic quietly solves one of the oldest feuds in family politics. Why you find the music your parents love hopelessly old and corny, while they genuinely, sincerely experience the stuff in your headphones as an unbearable heap of noise. At the dinner table, you try to settle it by arguing taste. It isn't about taste. It's a merciless trial about synapses. To predict the next note, your brain leans on a probability model it spent years building out of your culture. Call it your musical grammar. And before you hit puberty, the synapses in your brain are growing more wildly than they ever will again. In that window, your brain is a tireless data vacuum, hoovering up whatever scales and rhythms and chord patterns show up most often around you. The economist Seth Stephens-Davidovowitz, digging through Spotify's mountain of listening data, landed on one slightly brutal number. And treat this as a finding from a data writer, not a lab, but it lands. The peak moment your musical taste locks in is around 13 for women and 14 for men. After that, through your 20s, your brain runs a huge round of pruning to cut its energy bill. And somewhere in your early 30s, that door welds shut for good. So when a 50-year-old hears a new pop track laced with complex backbeats and a swarm of strange synth tones, his prediction model, fossilized somewhere back in the 1980s, tries to force a read on it, and the result is a pileup. Every beat lands outside his expectations. Every chord violates the odds in his head. Within minutes, his auditory cortex has racked up hundreds of prediction failures, neurons firing error after error. To a brain that's lost the ability to build new models, New music genuinely isn't a lesser art form. It is literally undecodable acoustic chaos. When your elders wince and reject the new stuff, they're not being snobs. Their brain is protecting itself from the pain of an overloaded processor. Be a little kind about it. They're not hearing what you're hearing. They can't anymore. Now, dopamine, for a clever guess, explains the intellectual pleasure of a well-made tune perfectly. But it leaves a hole. Guessing a note right is not enough to explain the sheer physical frenzy, the violence of it. If a correct prediction just hands out a little dopamine, then why does a slow, sad song raise goosebumps on your arms? The panic response your body is only supposed to fire when your temperature is crashing and you're in real danger of freezing to death. What other bug is buried in the code? Because if music were only an intellectual parlor game, our obsession would never have sunk as deep as it has. The thing that turns vibrating air into something genuinely addictive is an ancient chemical plant buried in the oldest part of the brain. In 2001, in the basement of the Montreal Neurological Institute, the neuroscientists Anne Blood and Robert Zatorre ran an experiment with a sly twist. They had volunteers each bring the one piece of music most guaranteed to give them chills, put them in headphones, and slid them into a PET scanner. No neon glow lit up the screen the way the movies promise. The machine was just coldly logging faint gamma rays. But the metabolic map it slowly assembled showed the blood and the pleasure heading straight for the brain's reward regions, the same circuitry that lights up for food and sex every time the chills hit. A decade later, in 2011, Valerie Salimpour and the same Montreal group sharpened the knife. Using a tracer that competes with dopamine itself, they caught the brain actually releasing dopamine into a tiny structure deep in the center, the nucleus accumbens, and, beautifully, they caught it spilling some during the spine-tingling anticipation before the big moment even arrived. So picture that little structure as the survival cashier evolution left behind in your skull. This cashier has always had strict lending rules. Across the whole history of our species, he opens the vault and releases dopamine for exactly two things. You take a big bite of high-calorie food, or you successfully pull off the mating that passes your genes on. That's his entire job: keep you alive, get you reproduced. Cold, simple, sensible. And now, in that scanner, this rigid old cashier has been thoroughly conned. A set of air vibrations lined up in particular ratios, air that delivered not one calorie, that carried no survival advantage of any kind, has somehow talked the vault open and walked out with a dose of dopamine equal to what food and sex would earn. That is not refined appreciation of art. That is a blatant neurochemical jailbreak, a chemical fraud, swindling survival funds straight out of the till for nothing. And the truly bizarre bodily response is still ahead. When a singer strains at the very top of their range, or an orchestra erupts all at once, your scalp tightens. A fine carpet of goosebumps spreads down your arms. A shiver might run the length of your spine. The French gave it its own word, frisson. To find where it comes from, wind the clock back tens of millions of years into a dense, ancient forest. When one of your tiny, mouse-like ancestors heard a wrong rustle in the dark or a high shriek, its brainstem seized the body in milliseconds and fired an order to the skin everywhere at once, contracting the little muscle at the base of every hair so the fur stood straight up. Biologists call it piloerection, and the point of it was to make the animal look suddenly bigger, to bluff a predator. Tens of millions of years on, you're safe in a padded concert seat, and the orchestra slams down an out-of-nowhere dissonant chord. Your auditory cortex relays the shock to the brainstem, and the brainstem, which has no idea what Beethoven is, which only knows sudden loud, instantly sounds that ancient air raid siren. Your hairs snap upright. The goosebumps rise. And then, a fraction of a second later, the rational prefrontal cortex catches up, scans the room, finds no lurking lion, just a few hundred people coughing in evening dress, and calls off the alarm. It's fine. We're at a concert. We're safe. And that gap, that instant snap between I am about to die and I am completely safe, sloshes a huge wave of contrast pleasure through the brain. What you've actually done is taste, from a place of total safety, a simulated brush with death at the level of the brainstem. A near-death experience with a money-back guarantee. And music can pull a second, sneakier chemical lever. When we get dumped or frozen out by our group, we have this strange instinct to lock the door and play the saddest, slowest songs we own on loop, like we're pressing on a bruise on purpose. The musicologist David Huron at Ohio State offers an explanation for that self-flagellating little ritual. And it's one proposed idea, not a settled fact, so hold it loosely. The ancient core of the brain, he suggests, can't fully tell a real social loss from a fake one acted out by some minor chords. It receives the desolate melody, decides you must be grieving something, and considerately secretes prolactin, a chemical that does real work, that can physically dull genuine neural pain. And because the music never actually hurt you, you've triggered the brain's grief compensation machinery without paying any of the real-world cost. You didn't just freeload the sadness. You freeloaded nature's painkiller along with it. But of course, once humanity worked out the mechanics of dopamine and broken expectation, the commercial and military machines were never going to leave a slab of meat like that lying on the table. The 21st century assembly line extracted the single most lethal part of predictive pleasure and cooked up the 15-second endlessly looping hooks of the short video platforms. The engineers in the hit factory simply hacked away the long buildups of classical music and distilled out the handful of notes that trigger a dopamine drip, and nothing else. James Kelleris, a consumer psychologist at the University of Cincinnati, gave the result its name, cognitive itch, better known as the earworm. These little scraps of melody burrow into your auditory cortex like parasites, precisely because they've been surgically cut off without an ending. The prediction compulsion that nature handed you turns into your worst weakness. When the clip cuts out right before the chord that was supposed to land, your auditory cortex is a blind man walking downstairs whose final step has been yanked out from under him. That same lurching disorientation of the missed stare. And to kill that dread of the unresolved, your brain becomes a skipping record, dragging the needle back to the start over and over, trying to force the melody to a safe landing it was never given. Which is why, in the shower, on the street, on the edge of sleep, your mind is helplessly looping 15 seconds of synth drums. Your brain is scratching its own itch and breaking the skin the more it scratches. And in darker rooms, that power to forcibly take over a mind has been forged into an actual weapon. In 2003, in the Iraqi desert, a U.S. psychological operations unit turned metal shipping containers into interrogation rooms. Outside, the heat. Inside, a blindfolded prisoner facing not water, but two high-powered speakers blasting for hours and days without stop at brutal volume, Metallica's Enter Sandman. Or more surreally, The theme song from the children's show Barney the Dinosaur, a purple cartoon in a bright child's voice singing about hugs and friendship, on and on, around the clock. No chemical injection required. The relentless sound pressure stripped the prisoner's brain of its right to predict, to make sense, to sleep. The neurotransmitters squeezed dry in the purple dinosaur's tireless, cheerful declarations of love. The documented record is grim enough without embellishing it. Trained, hardened soldiers, broken by a children's song played until meaning itself dissolved. The same back door that taps your foot in a cafe can, turned the wrong way, take a person apart. So, we've ridden this wave of air through the levers of physics, the kelp forest of the inner ear, the dopamine river of the deep brain. And now we have to face the question we parked at the very start, because nature is a stingy accountant who won't release a single penny without a reason. Your brain is 2% of your body weight and burns a full 20% of your daily calories. It is the most expensive organ you own by a mile. If music were only a trick for swindling dopamine, only a parlor game for raising goosebumps, the brutal audit of natural selection would have struck it off the books a million years ago. There is no universe where evolution pours that much precious computing power and energy into a thing purely because it's nice. So what survival debt did this useless-sounding wave of air actually pay tens of thousands of years ago when our species was hanging by a thread in the Ice Age? Time to put the famous scientists on trial. In 1871, Charles Darwin sat in his study in Kent, Oriental carpet, the whole scene, staring at a hole in his own theory that was giving him a genuine headache. 12 years before, in On the Origin of Species, he'd used natural selection, that cold actuary, to explain everything beautifully. A tiger's teeth, a beetle's armor, the dead leaf disguise of a butterfly. Anything that didn't help a creature feed, flee, or stay warm got struck from the ledger without sentiment. But now he turned the lens on humans, and the books wouldn't balance. The whole was music. To survive on a dangerous continent, our ancestors needed to creep up on prey in silence, to freeze and make no sound when a predator was near. And yet these freshly upright apes insisted on gathering together, burning hard-won calories and making loud, regular, conspicuous noise that gave away their position for nothing. Noise that neither filled a belly nor kept out the cold. It made no sense on his own terms. So Darwin racked his brain, looked out the window at the birds courting in the spring, and reached for a compromise: sexual selection. Human music, he decided, must be like the song of a male nightingale. In those lean, ancient times, a male who could spin out a complex melody was broadcasting an encrypted health report. Look at my lung capacity. Look at the fine control of my nervous system. Look what excellent genes I'm carrying. By that logic, the sweat-drenched rock star smashing a guitar in front of a stadium today is, biologically, no different from a pheasant frantically shaking its tail feathers in mating season. Both are a courtship display that burns enormous energy to show off. It's a seductive theory, and it doesn't survive contact with two simple questions. If music is just a tool for male courtship, then why can a woman's voice sing every bit as heavenly a line? And why does a baby a few months old, with precisely zero notion of reproduction, melt and settle so completely at its mother's lullaby? Darwin went to his grave still bothered by that hole. He knew the patch didn't quite hold. More than a century later, another hard-nosed thinker picked up the hot potato and gave an answer that enraged every musician alive. In 1997, the Harvard scientist Steven Pinker, in How the Mind Works, delivered a cold verdict. In evolutionary terms, music is useless. Not a trump card any species' survival rests on, just a byproduct. And to make the point vivid, he floated his famous auditory cheesecake idea. Why do we love cheesecake? Because tens of thousands of years ago, on the African savanna, fat and sugar were rare and life-saving, so the brain evolved to crave them intensely. The modern pastry chef just blends butter and sugar with industrial precision to pick the lock on that ancient craving. We didn't evolve in order to invent cheesecake. Cheesecake hijacked a mechanism that was already there for other reasons. Music, said Pinker, is cheesecake made of sound. We evolved language centers to communicate, and a sharp sound analysis system to tell a voice from the footstep of a predator. And music is just a clever trick later humans stumbled on, using particular frequencies to keep rubbing up against that ready-made wiring and squeeze cheap pleasure out of it. He pushed it all the way. If a gene wiped out our capacity for music tomorrow, he claimed, human life and human survival would not be affected one bit. It put Mozart's Requiem on the exact same shelf as a cheap sugary cake. The art world detonated. But the Casebook of Neurology soon dealt Pinker a ringing slap. Because if music really were just a parasite on the language system, the two would have to share the same hard drive. The better your language, the better your music. Damage the language center, and music should collapse with it. And then, along comes the Argentine revolutionary Che Guevara with his catastrophic dancing to wreck that neat picture. As the story is told, this master strategist who wrote fiery speeches, ran complex tactical reasoning, carried one of the most formidable language and reasoning brains of his time and place, was also a severe case of congenital amusia. At a dance, while the band played a slow, mournful tango, Guevara was reportedly stamping out scrambled, cheerful little steps in completely the wrong time. At official functions, he couldn't recognize his own national anthem and had to watch the people around him to know when to stand and remove his hat. Inside that skull, Marxist theory ran without a gap, but melody and rhythm were a tangle, physically walled off. The neurologist Oliver Sacks once recorded how the world sounds to a severe A music like him. A glorious symphony comes through like pots and pans crashing to a kitchen floor. And the reverse case exists too, which seals it. The great Russian composer Vissarion Shabalin, late in life, suffered a stroke that destroyed a huge region of the language center in his left hemisphere. He lost speech almost entirely, couldn't talk, couldn't follow language, couldn't spell the simplest word. And yet, in those silent final years, he kept right on composing, leaning on a completely separate set of intact circuits, and wrote some of the finest symphonies of his whole life. Put Guevara and Shabalin side by side, and the conclusion is medically unavoidable. Music and language run on independent tracks in the human brain. And if you want the deepest evidence, walk into a ward for advanced Alzheimer's. The people there have cortex worn away like a sponge. They've forgotten their own names, can't recognize the grown children at their bedside. But put on a pop song they first heard at 14, and a person who seemed an empty shell will stop, glance around, and start tapping the beat on the arm of the wheelchair, tears at the corners of the eyes, humming the next line of the lyric without a single mistake. Alzheimer's, like a blackboard eraser, wipes away the late, high-order language and memory we evolved most recently. But music sits sealed in the oldest, deepest cellar of the brain, where the eraser can't reach. And nature does not carve a useless byproduct into a foundation sturdier than language itself. The cheesecake was wrong. Here's where Darwin and Pinker made the same mistake. And it wasn't a mistake about facts, it was about where they were looking. Both of them kept their eyes locked on a single individual. One singer showing off for a mate, one listener savoring dopamine through a pair of headphones. To find out why music can actually save lives, you have to lift your gaze off the lone person entirely. You have to wind the clock back 40,000 years into the Pleistocene, through the howling glacial wind, and look at the ancient humans pressed tight together around a fire, surrounded by darkness and the wolves in it. And to find the trump card that decided our whole fate, we go to a cave in southern Germany called Hohle Fels. In 2008, in the team led by Nicholas Conard, archaeologists pulled a flute out of the thick Ice Age sediment of that cave, roughly 40,000 years old. This is not some disputed scrap of bone that a carnivore might have chewed into a suggestive shape. It is, beyond argument, a precision instrument, painstakingly carved from the long wing bone of a griffin vulture, drilled with finger holes. The kind of object that can keep a researcher staring into the dark long after midnight. Because picture what it cost. Ice Age Europe was no gentle place. Temperatures sitting around -20 all year, and a daily to-do list of exactly 2 items. Find enough calories to live, and don't get torn apart by a cave lion or a roving pack of Ice Age hunting dogs. And working a hard, dense vulture bone with a crude stone flake is no quick job. You have to scrape out the marrow, then calculate the position of each hole with care, sitting in a freezing cave, fully absorbed, grinding away for hours. From a pure survival standpoint, this is a near suicidal waste of resources. You've burned precious fat and time that could have bought you 2 more days alive, and the thing you made can't cut a hide or crack a nut. Its only function is that you blow into it and a few different pitches come out. What could possibly drive a starving Ice Age forager to do something that stupid? The answer is hidden in that beat-keeping back door we found earlier. When one person taps a foot to music alone, it's a neat little parlor trick. But when 50 Ice Age humans, scattered loose as sand, sit in a circle around the fire and start striking stones with sticks, stamping and chanting in perfect unison to one beat, the thing changes its nature entirely. Anthropology has a name for it. Muscular bonding, a phrase from the historian William McNeill. When your body locks into an exactly shared rhythm with the dozens of people around you, the deep machinery of your brain starts pumping out chemistry. And the evidence here is layered, so let me be careful. There's reason to think it releases oxytocin, the boundary dissolver that quiets the fearful amygdala and drops your guard, though that link is the softer part of the story. The firmer finding from the work of the anthropologist Robin Dunbar is that intense, synchronized group movement drives the brain to flood itself with endorphins, nature's own opioid painkiller. And that does 2 things at once. It lets the apes endure the -20 cold without feeling the pain of it. And it makes them physically, chemically addicted to the collective frenzy itself. They weren't making early art around that fire. They were doing collective drugs, manufactured in their own skulls. And nature does not care about art. Nature cares only about staying alive. 50 foragers, each one alone, each one cornered, are weak prey against the wolves of the Ice Age. And the moment fear breaks the group, every selfish individual scatters and runs, and they die one by one. But this is music's ultimate trump card. the single most successful act of mass mind control in the history of our species. Lit by a stretch of crude 4-beat war chant, 50 selfish sets of genes have their boundaries chemically dissolved and fuse into one thing, a tight, coordinated body with the fear of death switched off. This is why every ancient civilization marched to war behind drums and horns. Music is the oldest cheat code we have for dissolving the boundary of the self and stitching humans into cooperation at a scale nothing else could reach. Now, there's a tempting next sentence here, and I want to be honest and not say it. It is tempting to claim those singing, drumming tribes simply out-cooperated the silent Neanderthals and drove them to extinction. The trouble is, that's a story, not a fact, and quite possibly a backwards one, since some scholars argue the Neanderthals had music of their own. So I'll only say the safe, supported thing. Social glue at that scale is a staggering survival advantage, and our species had it in abundance. What it did to anyone else, we'll leave to the dark of the cave. And with that, Pinker's smug little cheesecake quietly falls apart because the evidence keeps pointing the other way. Music is not the crumbs that fell off language after the fact. A serious, well-supported idea, first floated by Darwin himself and not yet settled, so hold it as the live hypothesis it is, runs the opposite way. That music came first. Picture a prehistoric night with no grammar in the world yet. In a pitch-black cave, an infant, hungry or cold, starts screaming at the top of its lungs, and on a night full of predators, that cry will pull hunting dogs in from kilometers away. The mother cannot yet form a sentence. She cannot say, "The dogs are gone, you're safe." There is no syntax for it, no words at all. The only thing she can do is gather the infant in, and with a slow, repeating, gently falling rhythm, begin to hum. And that string of patterned sound passes straight over the infant's half-built cortex and reaches down and smooths the alarm system in its brainstem. This wordless thing from before language, the thing we now call a lullaby, is the first lesson in comfort our whole species ever learned. First the melody, then the grammar. First the war chant, then the city. So follow the thread back, riding this one faint disturbance in the air, 440 times a second. We've walked past the blacksmith's anvil and the mathematician's papyrus, down through the water pump of the inner ear, lain a while in the river of the dopamine factory, and come out at last beside a fire burning 40,000 years ago. The trip started in survival, but its ending is a long, slow betrayal stretched across tens of thousands of years. Because when this band of apes finally invented complex words and built their separate cities across the land, that ancient magic that once melted selfish genes around the fire met its great enemy. The Old Testament tells it as the Tower of Babel, God scattering humanity by confusing its speech. But from the cold standpoint of biology, language needed no God to divide us. Language is a force with a cruel streak of exclusion built in. When our species invented vocabulary, a large part of the point was to pin down precisely who is not one of us. Words and grammar can certainly define quantum mechanics, but they are even better at slapping labels on the world. Yours, mine, outsider, one of us. Language is, by its very nature, a machine for manufacturing division. Language is, by its very nature, a machine for manufacturing division. So here is the puzzle that leaves us. On the barbed wire ruins of Babel, what does humanity have left to recognize its own kind, while bypassing words entirely. In 2019, Samuel Mayer's team at Harvard published a cross-cultural study in Science that went looking. They dug a great pile of field recordings of human life out of dusty archives, songs from scattered small-scale societies all over the world, cut them into short clips, and gathered hundreds of listeners from dozens of countries for a blind test. The instruction was simple. Trust your gut, and guess what each sound is for? Is it for dancing? For soothing a baby to sleep? For healing? For going to war? A Manhattan accountant and an Amazon spear hunter cannot exchange half a syllable of language. By rights, stripped of all cultural context, a foreign song should sound to either of them like the drill going off downstairs. But the data came back with a stunning consistency. When a lullaby from a tribe on the far side of the earth played, the listener, with no idea whether the words were about leaves or buffalo, judged it correctly in an instant. Heart rate settling, a wash of calm. And when a war chant played, a programmer in Tokyo who'd never held a blade would feel his pulse spike and his muscles ready themselves. Across hundreds of thousands of years and the whole width of the planet, the basic messages still landed. Though there's one footnote here dripping with irony, and I can't resist it. In that same test, humanity agreed, strongly and across every border, on this is for dancing, and this is for calming a child. But on identifying the love songs, the entire species crashed and burned. Dead last, by a mile. Which tells you something almost too perfect, that after all these years of evolution, on the single question of what love actually is, the whole of humanity is still, to this day, talking completely past each other, without a shred of shared understanding. Make of that what you will. But for the basic rhythms tied to survival, music really does barge straight across the border that language is stopped at. A sentence has to travel the long, careful way, through Broca's area, through Wernicke's area, decoded word by word in the cortex before any meaning comes out. Music isn't nearly so polite. The instant it lights up the auditory cortex, it forks. One branch goes off to make small talk with the thinking front of the brain. The other kicks the door of reason clean off its hinges and goes straight for the brainstem and the limbic system, the oldest survival hub you've got, and sounds the bell there directly. And this is why every lullaby on Earth, in any language, shares the same handful of acoustic bones. A slow tempo, a low register, a soft, falling melody. Because that is a precise imitation of the calm, steady breathing and heartbeat of a safe adult mammal. And every war chant and every dance track, without exception, shares hard beats and a high, bright frequency band, the violent rhythm of blood scouring through your vessels when you're braced to fight for your life. The reason music can leap over language is not that it's some higher, finer translator sitting on top. It's that it is language's ancestor. Before we invented words to argue over land, in the long Ice Age nights when a predator might be on us at any second, the first thing we ever learned was to hum a screaming infant quiet and to pass fear and joy between us with a steady beat. Before we could speak a single word to each other, we had already found one another and known one another inside the same song. So go back and look at those 80,000 strangers in the summer stadium one more time. Look at them honestly. Their skin is every color. Their bank balances are separated by oceans. The moment they step out of that arena, plenty of them would happily crack each other's heads open over politics. But right now, in this one moment, simply because a guitar solo has come drifting through the warm air. All 80,000 of them have reddened at the eyes at the same instant and are leaping and roaring together like fools. This is not academic magic, and it is not refinement. The sound waves have effortlessly peeled away the thin coat of civilization and left two people who cursed each other's entire ancestry online last week, standing shoulder to shoulder, dignity gone, weeping into a stranger's shoulder like small children whose toys were taken. For a moment, the clock spins back 300,000 years. In the face of one particular set of frequencies, language fails. The walls between them dissolve, and out in the cold, these strangers complete an ancient embrace that needs no words at all. That foot it taps tomorrow, that sting it brings to your eyes at a single chord, that is not a flaw in your reason, and it is not refinement either. It is the same back door that once kept 50 shivering apes alive around a fire. The thing that hijacks you is the oldest thing that ever loved you. Of course, the moment the concert lets out, the magic lifts on the dot. And those same 80,000 primitives who were one family 30 seconds ago will immediately, fighting over the exit to the parking lot, use the very worst words they own to warmly greet each other's ancestors all over again.